we're really lucky here, I think, to have the Merida English Library. It's been a lifesaver for me. It's just such a wonderful community, and the collection is very impressive, if you ask me. Here we are in Southeast Mexico, and the collection of English books are pretty darn impressive. And since I'm probably like you, a bookaholic, it keeps me going. I brought several thousand books down when I moved here permanently 20 years ago. The weather either got to them, the bugs got to them, or I read them all. So I thank God for the library. I want to share with you and introduce my friend Feliciano Sánchez Chan. I want to share with you some of the translation. I'm not just a writer. I've been doing a lot of translation lately in the last couple of years, particularly translations of contemporary Mayan poets. I'd like to read from a couple of my books of translations. And I've also invited the author of this book, written in Mayan, in Siete Sueños in Espanol, and Seven Dreams in English. He will read a couple of poems from my translation, and then I'm asking Feliciano if he'll read some from the Mayan, so that you can hear a little bit more of the Mayan language. I know you hear it probably all the time in snatches on the street, but Feliciano was one of the first, probably the first poet I met that wrote in the Mayan language. So it's really an honor. He's I'll tell you a little bit about Feliciano. This bio is probably out of date, Feliciano. Yeah, okay, he's always doing new things. But Feliciano Sánchez Chan was born in the village of Tecash in the state of Yucatán, Mexico, in 1960. You're a little younger than I am. His work, Slices of Life, that's the English translation, won the Itzamna Prize for Literature, written in the Mayan language, awarded by the Institute of Culture of the state of Yucatán. The following year, 1998, his work, Ismasalet, was also won the Itzamna Prize, and his work, Yumkuts Yetel Puje, okay, was awarded third place. In 2003, he was awarded the Domingo Zulput Prize from the Autonomous University of Yucatan for narrative written in the Mayan language for his work Tomushi. He is currently a promoter of culture for the Department of Popular Culture of the state of Yucatan. That's just since this was published, he's doing all kinds of things. He reads all over Merida and other places in Yucatan. He goes frequently to Mexico City to read from his work. And his latest achievement that I just found out about on Facebook is he won the medal for a distinguished Yucatecan. So he's very well known in Yucatan as well as in other parts of the country, and through my translations, and also in the United States and other English-speaking countries. So I'm looking forward to hearing from him. And we'll start with Feliciano, because there's a couple of books I want to talk about if we have time. This book, Seven Dreams, which is my translation of Feliciano's book, Upi Wayat. And the latest project I've just completed, I also translated a novel, which we will only read 3/4 of that tonight. Now, I've translated a novel. That was the first and only novel I've translated. Primarily, I translate poetry. I just finished, it was just published this year, Oración Rustica, Praise for My Land, which is a collection of poems by José Díaz Bolio. You may have heard of José Díaz Bolio. He's one of the Yucatan's most famous writers. He was born in, my goodness, he was born in 1908, I believe. This book was published originally in Spanish. He's a Latin writer. Book was published originally in Spanish about 25 years ago. You may have seen, there are a lot of statues, and there's even an avenue out in the Colonia Alemán, I think, with Avenida José Díaz Bolio. He's very well known here. But I'd like to start with Feliciano and say a few words about translation. One of the biggest challenges of translation is to retain as much as possible the original cultural context. And a translation is essentially a version of the original that has to work in the target language being English. I would clarify that I did not translate these poems of Feliciano's directly from Mayan. He wrote them in Mayan, and almost all Mayan writers publish in bilingual editions for obvious reasons, to expand the audience. So he wrote the book in Mayan, he translated it himself into Spanish, and then I used the Spanish to translate it into English. So the whole idea of retaining the cultural context becomes complicated because already it's written in Mayan and then translated into Spanish, and you've already separated yourself slightly from the original, not slightly, dramatically, from the original cultural context. And then I come along and I translate the Spanish into English, so you can get pretty far away from the original intention of the author. However, thank goodness, Feliciano is a friend of mine, so once I had a rough draft of the translation, we were able to go through it together, looking back at the original Maya, so he could explain, word for word, more or less, what exactly he was talking about. It was very enlightening in many ways, because I'll give you an example in just a second. But again, when you're making a translation, as much as possible, you want to try to retain as much of the cultural context, the syntax, the structure of the language, rhythm, rhyme, but most of all, the way of thinking, which from the perspective of a Maya to a Latin writer to an English writer, you're really talking about three very distinct ways of looking at the world. And a translator can only do the best job that she or he can do to try to hold on to that. When you're making a translation, of course you're reading, but you're reading in a very profound way. You're reading for the poem, in the case of poetry, first of all, and then you really have to dig in word for word. As the philosopher Schopenhauer said, a major difficulty in translation is that a word in one language seldom has a precise equivalent in another one. So you're struggling to get as close as possible to the original word, which is virtually impossible. When you think of the word house, that carries with it all kinds of associations that somebody who thinks of the word casa carries all kinds of other associations that are, of course, similar, but different. So anyway, the good news is I had Feliciano to back me up on some of this stuff and explain exactly what the original context of the poem is. I'll give you an example. This poem is called Who Will Find Me? Este es, ¿cómo se llama este? ¿Quién va a buscarme? ¿Quién va a buscarme? Okay, I'm going to ask Feliciano to read it for you in Maya, and then I'll read my translation and tell you a little bit about how he was able to explain to me some of the concepts here.
Mas kung kastikin. Yan kine kukutunti shikin uyaya humpelhu. Yan kine beyin wol kimbu yikuyakan bake. Yan kine kimbu yikuetsnak uyuchul uyustal tsom. Wa baninglak. Yambash kuman tintukule injung mas wal satal kashe. Leken walak nak intukule kimwili kimbati jan uluch hunal tuchumuk usat behil nohka kintukultike injun mas wal bin kastikele.
Thank you, Feliciano. If you've noticed, it's not much like Spanish. Who will find me? This is my translation of Feliciano's poem. Who will find me? At times I hear the sad sound of a conch. At times I hear the moan of some horned creature. At times the echo of a cannon's blast, or the prayerful supplication from the hands of some brother. The first thing that crosses my mind, dear Lord, is who is lost in the jungle? I leave this dream and see myself all alone in the middle of the labyrinth of the big city. And I ask myself, Lord, who will find me? When I brought this translation to Feliciano, he explained some things. I mean, the translation is accurate. I think it's good. But there are things that I didn't know as I was translating, and that is these images of the sound of a conch, the sound of a horned creature, a cannon's blast, a prayerful supplication from the hands of some brother. Feliciano explained to me when Maya people are hunting, there's a certain protocol if you get lost in the jungle. And that is, if you might carry a conch shell and blow into it like a horn to alert others that you're lost. If that doesn't work, then the bone of some horned creature. You might also have a horn made out of a bull's horn or some other kind of creature, and blow into that, again, to alert anybody that might be nearby and that you're lost. Getting a little more desperate, if that doesn't work, you shoot off your shotgun. At times the echo of a cannon's blast. So you shoot your shotgun to alert others that you're lost. And then finally the image of the prayerful supplication from the hands of some brother. You put your hands together. Can you do that? Please, I say that. There. To again let people know that you've lost your way and you need help. I would have never known that, although I think the translation stands on its own. And the only way you could help is use footnotes, which I really don't like to do with poetry. It's not a scholarly work, it's a work of poetry. You could use footnotes and explain that whole thing, but it was just fascinating to me that he was able, that he explained something that was going on in the poem that I really had no idea of what it was all about. Let's read, vamos a leer Feliciano, Mi Pueblo. Now, I'm angry at the Museum of the Mundo Maya. They used somebody else's translation of this, and again, no word is equivalent in one language or the other. But the translation they used, instead of my village, which is how I translated it, was my people, which is an accurate translation. But I felt like in the context of this poem, he was really speaking about the village itself. Mi pueblo.
Inkahale kuntul noshi motokbaliana lubo ishaste uhentat mau no chakchu tia lupichiksis hati shimbalmak umpel pavo chupieter wogo nal sakkeyem tia lumansi kuwi hilubatsilo inkahal Soki ulik piktulu tene lutub sikumukia Tienu sakiku shek lil binit mako inkahale kubisikio kol kap ukayu chichilo uyashi lukashilo wau kibo kiluko sisal ulumil lekin kukamik uyutil leyutilti unjakoba vale Chinkuyang yanti kasu tukumpel sakche uhelinte Kashiwa kasabak tenupahta lilintsitik tutan yichinkahal umpel tumben janal tsikbale Letibetik kima kinwol yetel ukuk mele kambul yantin kaba Tumeni muhelmate chutubi kuyol son Chenu yohelutsi tsikbalo Yetele mehennayo sik kustal tupik tunilhaboba Inkahale kuntul nushi motok balijana lubo ishaste.
Thank you, Feliciano. My translation into English, my village. My village is an old man squatting on his heels beneath the shade of Mother Seba. He carries with him a great red gourd to serve fresh water to the traveler, a knapsack filled with bowls of white pozole to relieve another's hunger. Oh, my village, I have seen it forget so many times its own wounds while curing the pain of other people. Oh, my village brings to the world the song of the birds, the green of its forests, the sweet smell of damp earth when it received the kindness of the god Chak without asking for anything more than a smile. If I could only write on its face a new and different history. I am happy to do this with the feather of the quetzal I have in my hands, because I know that it does not spit bullets. It only writes stories and the little dreams that have given us life for millennia. My village is an old man squatting on his heels beneath the shade of great Mother Seba. You'll notice that I've left some of the words in the original Spanish in this case. First of all, because they're somewhat common. The Seba is the sacred tree of the Maya, which is worshipped by the Maya people, and you see plenty of them, or at least some of them here in Merida. Pozole is a type of drink. There's a word. I mean, how would you translate that? It's a corn-based drink that's used by, particularly by the Maya, particularly people that are working in the country. They bring with them a bowl of masa, which is ground corn, and when they're at lunchtime, they mix it with water and drink it to fortify themselves for the rest of the day. That would be a long explanation, and not a translation of that, a corn-based drink. It just doesn't work for me. And then the god Chop is also fairly commonly known as the god of rain. Those I throughout the book and through this book, the Oración Rustica, I also I leave certain words that are they're either common enough that most people would know. Why would you translate tortilla into English? Everybody knows what a tortilla is, and how would you translate that anyway? So I've left some of those. There's a point that was made by Ned Rorem, who was a composer of music. He said, "The art of translation lies less in knowing the other language than in knowing your own." That's very true. Of course you have to know, in this case, Spanish. As I said, I didn't translate directly from Maya. I can have a very basic conversation in Maya, but certainly would not translate from Maya. And other people have asked me as well, do you ever translate English into Spanish? And no. As this says, the art of translation lies less in knowing the other language than knowing your own. You have to be, to translate something into English, you have to be an expert in the English language first, and primarily, hopefully, to translate poet, you should be a poet yourself. There are translations made by scholars of the Spanish language who are very, very familiar with the Spanish language, and yet they're mostly scholars, and some of those translations are a little bit stilted. They're not. You have to take the original and you have to make a poem out of it, essentially, in the long term. A literal translation of a poem is not going to have the music, the rhythm of a poem in English. So it's very important to have a mastery of the language, what we call the target language. You certainly must know the source language, but the most important is the target language. As this person, Paul Goodman, says, to translate, one must have a style of one's own, for otherwise the translation will have no rhythm or nuance, which come from the process of artistically thinking through and molding the sentences. They cannot be reconstituted by piecemeal imitation. The problem of translation is to retreat to a simpler tenor of one's own style and creativity. Adjust this to one's author. So the real challenge is to take something from another language, particularly in poetry, and make a poem out of it. Otherwise, you could do what's called a machine translation. You could use Google Translator, but you wouldn't get much of a poem out of that, I don't think. With my translation of this novel, El Gran Viaje, by Juan Manuel Chavez, one has a little more latitude with prose. And there's not quite the challenge of the music of poetry, although it's important. The rhythm of the language and is just as important as prose. But poetry is a different matter. I want to hear another one of Feliciano's poems. This one is called Road to the Milpa. The Camino de la Milpa.
Tubeheli ichkol. Koten weyeshki ichpan mach inkabi. Koshin baltik letuch behtul beha. Kos baitik ulha yetelus kosomilk ok. Chain mekika kal. Chain hapika musik. Uchakin tsutsik achi tuboi hebalak cheile. Uchakin bohik ashish mukuyil tuyokolu sisal su. Chain shimbal tika winklal yeteluta cheil intsuts. Koshkubik kimak olal tilekich kelem hatskaba. Utsopole kchaholtik meya.
Thank you, Feliciano. Road to the Milpa. Milpa, again, is one of those words, you know, it's a cornfield, but that doesn't quite do it. A milpa is a sacred space for the Mayan people. It's not just a cornfield, a tractor and a farmer and whatnot. It's a sacred place. Road to the milpa. So I left it in the original Spanish, although I do have a asterisk here with a footnote to point out that it's a cornfield, which diminishes completely the power of the word, nevertheless. Road to the milpa. Come with me, my lovely. Take me by the hand, and we will walk this path together, shaking the dew with the fleeting shoes of our feet. Let me embrace you. Let me breathe your breath, and perhaps kiss your lips beneath the shade of some tree, and maybe bristle the skin of the fresh grass. Let me recollect your body with the torch of my kisses. We will hand over our happiness to this beautiful morning, and later, we will begin the work. I'm always reminded, I lived on an hacienda for 20 years, 2 hours from Merida, not far from where Feliciano is from, and everyone in that area spoke Mayan. But I'm always reminded of the couple that were working for me at the time. When they took off in the morning to go out to their milpa, they were laughing and smiling, and they seemed so happy. And I thought, wow, that's great that they're enjoying their work so much. Until I read Feliciano's poem and realized why they were looking so much forward to getting out into the fields. And I said, aha, okay, now I get it. Yeah. The Maya are very earthy people. Let's see. I want to finish up with your beautiful poem, Chanlul. Oh, that's Lol, as you may know, means flower. Chan is little.
Changlol. Matenu kastik champepen basubet tutan akich pamil changlol. Sataluyol yetel ulembal yetel alembal beishan ubonil aleo. Watun ushuch ukabil akopnel. Watun umol ujisal amatsab. Watun ucha sisil aboy. Wapatak tuchtal uchant akich kelebi.
Chango, little flower. The butterfly can't decide what to do faced with your beauty, little flower. Stunned by your gorgeous radiance and the color of your petals, it can't decide whether to drink the honey of your womb or perhaps collect the pollen from your eyelashes. It doesn't know whether to just be delighted in your fresh shade or remain contemplating your beauty. And if you haven't noticed, Feliciano is a romantic, which is refreshing, because in a lot of contemporary English poetry, there's not a lot of romance there. So I particularly appreciate that aspect of his work, in all of his work. Of course, he's published probably, how many books in, ¿cuántos más libros ya publicados después de eso?
Como 6.
6 más?
Sí.
Yeah, so he's published at least 6 more books since we worked on this project together. He never stops.
Acaba de ganar la medalla.
And I mentioned that he just won the medalla of outstanding Yucatecan. So we're very proud of him for that. The other project that I've just completed is by the poet José Díaz Bolio, which I mentioned earlier. The name of the book, and by the way, I have books for sale. I have the Oración Rústica and my book, which I hope I can promote here before this whole thing is over. But I translated this book from Spanish. He's not a Mayan writer. He was a Spanish writer, or a Yucatecan writer, who died in about 25 years ago. As I mentioned on other occasions, translation is really, it's a collaboration. That's why I had so much enjoy working with Feliciano. It's really one of the, it's a way to, I'm primarily a writer. I work for a magazine right now in Washington, D.C., writing book reviews. I'm finishing up a novel and putting together a selection of my poems from my published books. And so I really enjoy getting out of my own head through translation and getting into the mind of someone else, like Feliciano. The South African writer, or was she Rhodesian? Iris Murdoch said, "I enjoy translating. It's like opening one's mouth and hearing someone else's voice emerge." So that's a very satisfying part of translation. Because you're entering the mind of another person. In the case of José Díaz Bolio, I was collaborating with a person who died 25 years ago. This book was first published in 1939, so it was challenging. You're not, in that case, you're not just entering the mind of another person. You're going into another era, another epoch. A book that's published in 1939 has a quite different feel than something that's a contemporary poet like Feliciano. The José Díaz Bolio was born in Merida in 1906. He died in 1998. He was a scholar of Maya culture, a poet. He wrote guides to the ruins. In fact, one of the first books, I first moved to Merida nearly 40 years ago, in 1984. One of the very first books I bought was a guide to the ruins of Uxmal, and it was written by José Díaz Bolio. I could never have imagined at that time that 40 years later I'd be translating one of his books. But his daughter, Doña Margarita Díaz Rubio, has a foundation here in Merida dedicated to her father's work and dedicated to collecting and preserving the literature of the Yucatan Peninsula. It's a wonderful place. It's called Proispin. If you ever get a chance to go there, she has a museum dedicated to her father. Then there's an archive which has a whole range of original manuscripts and books by Yucatecan writers, and she's really something to have spent a good part of her life. She now herself is probably in her 90s, I would say, to dedicated so much of her life not only to her father's work but to preserving the literature of the Yucatan Peninsula. But this José Díaz Bolio, he loved his place of birth. He loved Yucatan, and he wrote about, in this book, he's writing about the life of a Mayan campesino. And now, as I said, he himself was not Mayan, he was Hispanic. But he spent a great deal of time in the countryside and with Maya people, and learned a lot about their culture and wrote about their culture. The book is written in very simple but very lyrical language. It deals with the everyday life of a country person in Yucatan, in very simple things with tortillas, his hammock, his dog, his shotgun, birds, his thatched hut. He writes this all from the point of view of a person living in rural Yucatan in the 1930s. What surprises me, because I also lived in rural Yucatan for some 20 years, in many ways the book doesn't seem that outdated, because not much has changed in some ways. It's a very, tends to be a very traditional society, and much of what he writes about is still very much the way it is today. Some of his attitudes of that era are not quite up to our standards, particularly when it comes to women and things like that. But it's a fascinating book. I'll read a couple excerpts from it, from my translation. This is called Birds. Always paint yourself with birds, my beloved land, always with birds, so that you are brushed by the wing of the cardinal and dressed in the blue dove's attire, and will become music in the voice of the nightingale, so that you may become a colored rebozo in the afternoon sun and trill bird song at dawn, so that I may walk the white road on the way to my thatched hut among trees woven with fluttering and song, so that you will never cease being you. Always paint yourself with birds, my beloved land, always with birds. So it's an homage to his birthplace of Merida, or of Yucatan. Again, I retained some of the original Spanish because, for the same reason I explained earlier, most people who have been here for a while know what a rebozo is. It's a scarf. And so we've retained that. In this next poem, I also retained the word alvaradas. An alvarada is these stone fences that are put around fields in Yucatan. And also rebozo and muchacha. Everyone knows what a muchacha is. And it has a little, I left it in Spanish. It doesn't sound quite right in English to me, but nevertheless. This one's called Afternoon After the Rain. Put on your rebozo, put it on and let's go into the fields. The rainbow is peeking through the door and the frogs in the puddles have begun to sing. How green are the leaves on the tops of the trees and on the white alvaradas. How white are the stones. Put on your rebozo, put it on and let's go into the fields. The July rain has kissed the earth and the earth has opened itself to love. Little golden marbles, the fruits of the Ramon groves have fallen to the ground and begged to be picked up. Who has perfumed the earth with such a Yucatecan fragrance? Muchacha, the rainbow is peeking in through the door, inviting us to go out. Put on the rebozo that I bought you at the fair. Put it on and let's go into the fields. There's another couple anxious to get out into the fields. I was just looking at the word Ramon. That's a kind of tree that the leaves are very nutritious. They're fed to cattle and to hogs. And there was an investigator from Spain who did a study of Ramon, and he said a family could live off of and in the old days, in the 30s, in the 20s, they made tortillas out of Ramon, tortillas de hojas de Ramon. They made tortillas out of that. It's a very nutritious food used now primarily for cattle. Let me sort of wind things up here so I can open the floor for questions. I do want to read something from my book, and I want to read at least one poem by Merida Cuevas called. We'll let this be for a bit. I have these books are for sale here too. This anthology came out about a year or so ago. It's called Like a New Sun. It's an anthology of 6 contemporary Mexican poets writing in indigenous languages. So not only is Yucatec Maya represented here through my translations from Merida Cuevas Club, there are also translations by others from the Zapotec language, from the Tzotzil language, Nahuatl, Zoque, and Mazatec. There are, I'm not sure, I can't remember now, but there are hundreds of indigenous languages in Mexico. And it's interesting, they have a map of the different language groups. And Yucatec Maya is by far the most widely spoken of all these indigenous languages. Languages like Zoque, Tzotzil have a fairly small audience of that language. But I'll read you at least one, and then I want to open it up. Then I want to read one of my poems, and then I want to open it up for some questions. This poem by Merida is called Father. You want to read it in Maya? Okay.
Inyong like ame atan kuhitik ukan tahol mas pal hoch usiknal chicho tutan akola atak mabaka ta hanta uchukil beats like bis papatik tameesh tak tamo tun tamacha mawatak tak awenel tiwilik tupach awich boch and boch yokol apakat inyum alti inna ka umuch o apol utan akol beisan ame esitla mo tun shen much wenel tuyonal ugel sikuba upach awich kahokok simbal apakat hebish hol hiakile.
Thank you, Feliciano. In English, the poem is called Father. Father, look, a spider has woven its hammock in your hair. What little child has sketched the flight of birds on your forehead? You've been secretly eating cotton candy. Look how you've stained your mustache, even your eyebrows. Don't you want to sleep? A shadow has fallen across your gaze. Father, tell mommy to wash your hair, your face, your mustache and eyebrows. Go to sleep. Rest your drooping eyelids so that you can wake refreshed like yesterday. The images are beautiful. She's describing, or the speaker is describing, someone who's gotten old. You know, a hammock is woven, a spider has woven a hammock in your hair, and the wrinkles on your face are like a flight of birds on your forehead, etc. One more by Briseda, and then if there's any questions. And I want to end with a plug for my new book, Lift Up the Stone, The Gospel According to Jonathan. And it fits with our theme of translation. The version in Espanol was translated by Fernando de la Cruz, who some of you may know. He used to be on the board of directors here. He's now at the University of California at Irvine, working towards his doctorate. But one more by Briseda. The plaza without you. You disappeared the way a cigarette burns down. The smoke still lingers. The road swallows you. The distance hides you. Out there on the plaza, the people gather. They are tumbling stones, crushing my soul. The eyes of the plaza scan back and forth, seeking you. It cannot feel your soft tread on its skin because you are gone. That's Briseda Cuevas called. She lives in Campeche, still lives in a small town, Tepecan, in Campeche, Mexico. Although she's published several books, and her poems have been translated into French, Dutch, English, Italian, and she's a founding member of the Mexican Steering Committee of Writers of Indigenous Languages. I think that Feliciano has been on that, the Organización de Escritores de Lenguas Indígenas. Yeah. Mm-hmm. One of the things that group is trying to do, Feliciano, Briseda, others, Mayan speakers, is trying to standardize the Mayan language. It's interesting. The Maya that the spelling and punctuation of the Maya that Briseda writes in is slightly different from Feliciano. So because there's so many varieties of Maya, of Yucatec Maya spoken in Yucatan, that they're trying to come up, a committee of which Feliciano is on, Briseda is on, trying to come up with a standardized version of the language. So that's my presentation. I want to end it with at least one poem from my book. But in the meantime, is there any questions, comments, anything you'd like to ask Feliciano? Dr. Fucho, do you have any comments or questions, preguntas sobre la poesía de Feliciano o de cualquier cosa?
A mí me gusta mucho la poesía del maestro Feliciano Sánchez Chan. Esa rítmica que tiene y que habla tan bonito de la tierra, del amor, de la selva, de lo que tenemos, de la vivencia. Y pues siempre es un honor escucharlo y soy su seguidora. Muchas felicidades, maestro, y gracias por esas bonitas poemas que nos da.
Thank you, Dr. Fucho. Any other comments? Yes, ma'am. Mm-hmm.
Now, when I hear he's speaking in Mayan,
Yeah.
it's very beautiful, the nice sound, and really nice. But what I hear the people say that English has many same words like in Mayan. Is that true?
I hear that often too. That people say Mayan is a lot like English. I think really what they're saying, I've never seen any real commonality in the words. I think what they're saying is the pronunciation is much easier for an English speaker than for a Spanish speaker. So the pronunciation, I believe, there's a similarity in pronunciation. Dr. Ficto, you have a...
¿Puedes decirlo
Sí.
también en español?
Yeah, and I'll translate it. Yeah.
Lo que preguntó ella. y-
Oh, she's-
Lo que tú contestaste.
Yeah, ella preguntó si de inglés y español, inglés y maya
Maya.
tienen la misma,
Ajá.
algunas mismas palabras, hay similaridades. Respondo que yo pienso que no, no mucho, pero es la pronunciación, I think, is what people are referring to. The pronunciation seems to be a lot easier for an English speaker than it is for a...
Creo que tal vez lo que se aproxima un poco es el orden sintáctico de las oraciones.
That's true,
Frases.
yeah.
Ajá, eso sí creo.
Yeah,
Eso
yeah,
sí.
the syntactical, the order of the words, you know, in Spanish, the adjective follows the noun, for example. In English, it precedes the noun, so that's another similarity.
What I heard was a lot of glottal stops.
Yeah.
English and probably Maya seem to have a full plate of glottal stops.
Yeah, you're right. In this, the introduction to this book, now I wish I had marked that. It says that the Maya, Yucatec Mayan is a two-tone language. The language makes use of ejective consonants, which is essentially what you're talking about, glottal stops, where the sound is not coming from the lungs necessarily, it's coming from the upper part of your mouth. You hear that a lot with Feliciano. Of ejective consonants, which are written using an apostrophe to distinguish them from plain consonants. Yucatec Maya had a written script that predates the colonial presence in the region, but is now written in Latin script, introduced during the Spanish conquest of the Yucatan that began in the 16th century. You're right, there are like, pa'al, you know, is the word for child. The second part of the word comes from the tongue on the top of on the bottom of the palate. Pa'al. Pa'al is niño, no?
Mhm.
Say, tú dices.
Bal,
Pa'al, okay.
Pa'al.
Yeah.
bal.
Any other
Pa'al.
comments or concerns? All right, I get to plug my new book then. This book is what I've done. It's I've rewritten the Gospel of Matthew in contemporary postmodern language, and set the story of the Gospel in the modern Israel, Palestine, within the conflict. So I'm imagining that Christ is alive, and he and his apostles are traveling through Israel and Palestine and confronted with all these, bombs and the conflict that's happening there. I'll read just one poem from the book. In the original gospel, as I'm sure most of you know, there were 12 apostles. In my version of the gospel, there are 13 apostles. This is called the 13th apostle. No dog has ever been as blessed as me, lying beneath the table at your last meal. I licked your sandaled feet, and you scratched my stomach with the strap behind your heel. and fed me scraps of bread and meat. I'm not remembered in any of the books, not Mark, nor Luke, nor Matthew, not even John. I suppose they didn't think that dogs have souls. But I was there. I'd sniffed the double agent out. I could smell the trail on Judas' feet. I tried to warn you with a bark. I think you understood, but you ignored me. And so I settled back and just enjoyed your sandals rubbing gently on my belly. Thank you. Thank you for coming tonight. Thank you for your attention. Thank my dear friend Feliciano Sánchez Chan for coming and sharing with us a little bit of Mayan culture and Mayan language. Thanks again. And thank you, Scott.